A latest survey result from Berson's wide-ranging study called Elevating Equity showed that only 22% of survey participants believe that their organization's diversity, equity, inclusion efforts raise awareness among their employees, customers, or suppliers. This gives us an implication that organizations may be wasting a lot of money on ineffective D&I efforts. If your organization is considering rolling out a new D&I program or wanting to take your existing D&I initiative to the next level, continue watching this video. During this video, you'll get 5 tips to make sure that your D&I efforts will move the needle and avoid the trap of making costly D&I investments that don't stick. Usually, when an organization has finally come to realize that there's a business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, the most common initiative that leaders want to implement is to do a D&I training, like an unconscious bias training. While the idea behind a diversity and inclusion training is valuable and ethical, when it's implemented incorrectly or without any careful thought, it can often backfire from the real intention that leaders have why they want this done. Here are 5 ways to make the most of your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and investment. First, have a clear diversity, equity, and inclusion vision and strategy, and communicate it. Start with a vision. What's your why? Envision where the organization would be 2 to 3 years from now. What would look different? What would be different from today? This is very important because if you don't know what transformation you'd like to achieve, how would you identify how to get there? In that same survey, 76% of companies had no diversity or inclusion goals of any nature. So again, knowing what transformation the organization would like to achieve is critical in forging that big picture implementation. I'd like to stress that everyone in the organization has a responsibility to make D&I efforts work. It is important to note, though, that the intention should start from the top. The people who has the authority to give approval and provide the support and resources to move forward any initiative, having them as a lead and getting their buy-in is already a big step towards making the initiative a success. Once your D&I strategy is shaped, communicate it regularly to reinforce that inclusion is an organizational priority. Second, embed D&I strategy in your business and people strategy. A D&I strategy aims to create an inclusive workplace culture. Inclusion, as we know, is the act of making people feel that they belong, that they feel valued, they are empowered, and they feel safe to bring their authentic selves to the workplace. Inclusion should be continually created and reinforced every day at work. And so we want to avoid the perception that the D&I strategy is just another HR initiative. We need to ensure that the D&I strategy is embedded in both our business and people strategy. The D&I strategy needs to be adapted to each of the organization's business strategy and vision. So make sure that you come up with a strategy that reflects the organization's priorities. It should also reflect what your employees, clients, and stakeholders need. And why the need to integrate the D&I strategy to your people strategy? Every business function involves people. Just think of an area in your organization where people are not involved. Can we think of any? So this just gives us an insight that D&I initiatives touch every area in our organization. And so that's why it's really important to note that your D&I strategy should not be a separate one from your business and people strategy. By the way, before I proceed with the third tip, I have a D&I roadmap that you could use as a guide to begin developing your D&I strategy using a holistic and multidimensional approach that will help your organization jumpstart your D&I efforts. Click on the link below to get a copy of your D&I roadmap. Let's continue with the third tip. Incorporate D&I metrics in your business and people strategy. As the saying goes, what gets measured gets results. With the right D&I metrics in place, it would be relatively easy to identify the measures to check whether your D&I program or initiatives are working. Intangible outcomes like improved employee retention, more productive employees, less time for managers in dealing with interpersonal conflicts, fewer litigations and complaints related to microaggression, discrimination, and even harassment. These are all invaluable outcomes when it comes to measuring the success of your D&I strategy and programs. Fourth, establish distributed accountability. D&I metrics and outcomes should not just reside in one unit of the organization. So the metrics are driven by the organization's business objectives, enabling this to deliver more value to your business. Again, if the goal is to truly create an inclusive culture, it is important to note that accountability at all levels should be in place. It is needed to ensure progress. Last tip I can give you today: design a holistic D&I approach that goes beyond unconscious bias training. A holistic approach involves designing an approach that touches on all levels in the organization, all aspects and all functions in the organization. It also involves looking at the practices, the processes, and the systems that are conducive for people to behave inclusively and create an environment that supports change in behaviors. When training is the only aspect of your D&I initiatives, not only will employees consider it a task, they'd also feel that it is not enough effort. In fact, forward-thinking organizations have already begun looking at their organizational culture, structures and resources in place. What are the HR functions that needed to be improved? What are the programs, partnerships, and the communities that they serve, with the goal of embedding D&I strategy in all these. Having a D&I roadmap will guide you through the process and provide you clear guidelines on how to move the needle towards the transformation that you're aiming for, and that is to have a diverse, committed, and engaged workforce, and more importantly, a workplace that is inclusive. Now that you know the 5 ways to avoid the costly D&I efforts that don't stick, it is helpful to have a roadmap to identify the steps necessary to build a holistic, multifaceted approach that can help your organization make the most of your D&I efforts. Go ahead, click on the link below to get your D&I roadmap.